friends, welcome to A Scrappy Little Joy. I'm Pam, and today we are here with block 6 already of our Weekly Whim project. First things first, here is our block. It's called a Woodland Crossing, and today one of the things that we're going to be focusing on, and I call it sewing triangles to squares to make triangles. And what that means, to make larger triangles. But there are some tricks to sewing triangles to squares because sometimes we don't know what to do with those little points. We're going to talk about that today. Also, we're going to talk about the little combo between scant 1/4 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And if for those of you who have not seen it's in Patchwork Pointers. It is my newer tutorial about scant 1/4 of an inch. It touches on when there are times where a 1/4 of an inch is just fine, and we're going to touch on that today as well. Okay, first things first, remember, if you are new to our channel, first of all, if you're new to our channel, welcome. If you would like what you're seeing, please think about subscribing down below. I would appreciate having you here as a regular member of our channel so that you know when we're coming with new weekly whim blocks or other cool videos that are generally quilty related, but always encouraging and always crafty. So first things first, down below you'll find the link to my blog, which is called Pam Selkirk Designs, and that's where you'll find the download for today for your cutting instructions. Okay, so that's right down there at the bottom. And you'll see that we have 5 fabrics today. You know what? Let me just pull out our box, because for those of you who know or don't know, we try to keep all of our fabrics for this project in one box. My box is getting a little fullish, but that will allow us to always be able to reach back into our box and find some fabrics that we've used in our past blocks. And remember, here's our past blocks. So far, these are the ones that we've done so far. And so for today's block, we are pulling this fabric back from, where did we put that? That was in our block 4. So we're pulling this fabric back out, and I've pulled 4 more fabrics back in. It's 4 more fabrics in. And remember, friends, you are perfectly welcome. Mix and match. If you want to dip more into your box than bringing new fabrics in, feel free to do that. I tend to just like lots of different fabrics, and so that's why I tend to do it. But it is really up to you, and that's the beauty of having this box. We can dip into this box as much as possible. However, the more we pull other fabrics in, the more we have the ability to pull different colors in as well and sort of scatter them across our quilt as we work together to build this quilt one block at a time. Okay, so here are my blocks. I'm going to put those in, or here are my fabrics. I'm going to put those in my box, tuck my box where it lives, and we are going to start with our fabric A. And these are the largest squares that we have so far. Where's our little bin for our little letter tiles? Also, there is, for those of you who are new, there's a letter tiles sheet that you can download as well for helping you to organize your blocks if you don't have that, or if you don't want to write on a little piece of paper a bajillion times, which is what I've always done in the past. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take these fabric A squares and we are going to cut them in half diagonally one time. We could stack them all up, yes, and it wouldn't be wrong to do that. I always find that I like to cut them individually if possible, because then I know right on. Invariably, if I stack them all up and I think they're all neatly stacked and perfect, one of them's off, and then I cut it and it's just not perfect on the edge, and it's just as easy to cut it one square at a time. Okay, so we are going to be joining our fabric A to our fabric B. And let's lay out, we can lay that. Do I want to do that? Let me get a design mat, and then we can move it aside if we want to. If you friends have not seen, I just finished a tutorial on how to make a design mat I made a smaller one in the video. I don't have it handy, but anyway, how to make these design mats DIY, okay? So you don't need to go and buy one. You can make one any size you want. So I'm going to lay these out on my design mat. Anyway, I think that will be, it's not posted yet, but it will be posted by the time this video is posted. It'll be there somewhere. Probably, I don't know where I'll put it, but you'll find it, I promise. Okay, so we've got all of our fabric B squares. Mine are directional, so I like to put them in the right direction, or the direction that I want them in. These are going to go like this. So if you can see, I'm going to just scoochie my little square right to the edge. If you can see, my triangles are all going to go like this around, and we are going to sew our triangles to our squares to make triangles, right? So that's what I was saying. And it can be a little bit tricky when we have these little points and we just don't know where we want our little points. So let's start with this guy. The first thing I want to do, let's go ahead and lay our fabric B square over our fabric A triangle. And do you see where I have these points hanging off the ends? That's where I want them. We want to sew right here. We want to sew on the right angle, right? We don't want to be sewing where the triangle is because that's frustrating if we can avoid it. So what we want is to sew a seam right there. And I'm going to start at this corner, this sharp corner. And you know I have to take my shoes off. And these, let's go ahead and sew these at a scant 1/4 inch, and I'll show you why. And again, you'll start to recognize, oh, I better sew that at a scant 1/4 inch, and here's why, because I know in my head why, right? Because you don't always have that instruction, and you need to be able to trust yourself. And that's why I'm here, to help you learn how to trust yourself. Let me get my leaders and enders going. All right, now, whoopsie, I didn't need to trim that one. See, we've got that. Let's go ahead and press it toward our square, okay? And then I'll show you how we're going to add that other corner, right? Let's get this in the right position. Now we want to add this one. So let's turn this one this way. We're going to start here again, and we're going to sew down here. Now this is where you'll see, once we get this in place, this is where you'll see why we're doing this seam at a scant 1/4 inch, okay? Okay. Always takes me a minute to get my leaders and enders warmed up. I am getting quite a stash, friends. Let me just show you. Look at here. Those are all my blocks. Aren't they cute? Okay, so those, and well, I have some ideas about that, and it's coming together, so I'll share that with you as soon as I can. Okay, so there's my little guy. Let me go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to press toward, how did I do that? I pressed toward, I really wanted to press toward the triangle, if I'm being honest. Not that it matters. I wanted to press toward the triangle. So when we're doing these others, we're going to press toward the triangles. So I'm pressing toward the triangles. Doesn't hugely matter in this case, but that's there. The reason I wanted this at a scant 1/4 inch is because we want to trim this, and we're going to trim this in a minute. And the more room we have to trim, the better. Okay, so I'm going to go and do it the same way again. I'm going to start on that square. Okay, now let's press toward the triangle. And then we're good. Best thing to do is just go ahead and lay it right back down on your design mat. That way you know right where it's supposed to go. So let's get this one sewn. let's press again toward the triangle. Okay, now you see we've got 2 corners done. I'm going to go ahead and do this one, and I'm going to let Mr. Woods just kind of zippy this part along real quick, and you can go ahead and do your other 2 corners, and if you need to recheck, you can just always come back and rewind a little bit and rewatch it. But let me just go ahead and get these done, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. Okay, now we're back and we've got all of our little all of our corner triangles finished. Now what we're going to do is trim them. So I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to take each one of our triangles, our corner triangles. And this is why we wanted them with a scant 1/4 inch, because a scant 1/4 inch means we've got as much as possible hanging off the bottom here. That's why we want those triangles hanging off the bottom, and we want this a square edge, because that's where we want to trim. What we're going to do is we're going to take our ruler, whatever ruler that you have that accommodates this, and then we want to line up a line, any one of these lines, with this right along this diagonal point of our square, okay? And then we want to be hanging over a 1/4 inch here. And so what you'll see is if you've got this position, so this is nice and straight here in relationship to your square, you're going to have a nice straight line here, and you are going to have an extra 1/4 inch all the way here for that seam allowance, okay? So let's trim that. See that little beauty? Okay, I'm going to put that guy over here. We'll move this back over here when I'm done trimming, because then we can do our others. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing with this one. Let's line that line right up so that we can trim right at a 1/4 inch. Okay, and one more, so that this line goes right through the middle. Oopsie, a little bit. Sometimes you'll find this is kind of not a straight line in terms of what you've trimmed off. See that? But that's how we're evening it out, right? Okay. That's the other thing you can do if you really want to line up your point. Maybe you want to line up your point here with a straight line there, so you can feel like that's nice and straight too. Sometimes that helps your eye to a little bit rely on your mat as well. Okay, there is that one. And we have all of our 4 corners finished. See that? Okay, so now I have also brought with me, from my scant 1/4 inch video, you will remember that I shared about a 9 patch, and how a 9 patch and a 4 patch, because we don't have any other real seams in here, these can be really sewn at a 1/4 inch if we like, and it's gonna come out pretty well the size that we want it. So what do we see in the center of our block here, friends? We say a 9 patch, right? So we can, if we want, sew this unit, this center part, at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we'll measure it at the end before we sew on our corners, and we'll see how that's going to work. Okay, first things first, what we're going to need, I've done a little fussy cut with my center, and remember, you don't need a special fancy ruler for that. If you want a fussy cut, all you need, this shape is 3 3/8 inch, okay, which is kind of tricky on any ruler. There certainly isn't a 3 3/8. So any ruler that works with that, what you want to do is take your card, any cardstock piece of paper, 3 3/8 inch square, diagonal line drawn. And then remember, you can line this up, let's see where I've lined it up, on the edge of your ruler, and you can put a little Sharpie mark right here and then right there in the center as that point meets. And then you don't need this, you just need this. You line up that little dot right in the center, and you line up all of your little points all the way around, and then you can trim, and there's your little fussy cut whatever right there in the middle, right? And then remember, you just need your little hand sanitizer. As I drop everything off my table, hand sanitizer takes it right off, that Sharpie mark right off. Okay, so I've got my little guy there. And then I need my fabric D. Where's my pretty illustration? Here it is. So I need my little snail guy there, and my fabric C. These guys are going to go here. Right? And then we're going to put these guys here. And now we're going to do this just as we've always done it before. We'll sew this side, this column together, this column together, and this column together, and then we'll talk about how we want to press those so that they can nest. But remember, this can be a 1/4 inch seam allowance because we're not going to lose too much because it's going to nest. And there aren't a lot of other seams in these units. Whoops, now see what am I doing? I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance because, yeah, hang on. Because I'm so used to doing a scant 1/4 inch. But I really want to show you how a 1/4 inch works just fine. So I'm going to make sure that I'm doing this at a 1/4 inch. Okay, there we go. And I've got my next size up for my, moving to my next size up for my little leaders and enders. But those have to be a scant 1/4 inch. So it's the switching around in your mind that can be a little bit tricky, and I get that. Not something I don't understand. Okay, so let's get this guy on. And you know, Mr. Woods could go ahead and just zippy along right in here too, because we're just sewing our unit together and we know how to do that, right? One column, and then one column, and then we'll come back and we'll decide how we want to press them. Okay, now let's talk. Look at that, horrid. Somebody was going a little too fast there. Where am I? Here's my seam ripper. Also, in other words, I have to rip that out because that is not straight at all. And that is not going to be a good example for our regular 1/4 inch because it's not going to look right because it's not a 1/4 inch. Okay, let's straighten this out. I don't have to rip the whole seam out. I just have to rip part of it. Okay, let me try this again. Okay, a 1/4 inch pan with 2 pieces of fabric that are straight on, evenly lined up like a normal person. Okay. Here we go. All right, let's pull this back in and let's lay these out with our triangles. And let's see what seams are going to line up next to each other, bump into each other. Here's the beauty. Nothing is going to bump into these. So we don't have to worry about how we press this center unit in relationship to these corners. All we need to do is press our columns for the center unit, nesting in a nesting way. So I'm going to go this way with this one, this way with this one, and this way with this one. Does that make sense? Okay, let's try it. This way. And then this one is going to go the other way. And then this one is going to go this way. And let's join these little guys so we have a nice little happy center unit. And then again, these can go a nice little 1/4 of an inch, not a scant. You could pin here if you like. I like to get started here because this is a nice big block, and then I just line it up there and I make sure it's nice and smooth, and then I hold it until just before it goes under the needle. Okay, and then I scoochie just a little further, and then I do the same with this side, so that if there's a little bit of kind of maneuvering, I've got plenty of room to do it here. And so this is nice and flat as I go under that needle, under that presser foot. Okay, now let's put this guy next to this guy and do the same thing. 1/4 of an inch. I say 1/4 of an inch. Do you say 1/4 inch seam allowance? 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I was thinking about this the other day. Yeah, see, this one requires just a little tug in order for that to lay evenly. I don't know, maybe I wasn't quite accurate on my seam. But that's okay, I've got room to get it there, here. There we go. And remember, what if it's not perfect? What if it's not? You know, we're growing, we're becoming. Perfection is the beacon, the joy is in the journey. You know the way it goes. Okay. So there is our little center unit. How does this want to lay? I don't know, the flattest would be if I opened these seams up. So I think I might do that, but you can press them toward the center, toward the outside. That's really up to you. I'm going to press mine open here because it just feels like it might be a nice way to make our block comfortable. We're going to also measure. I'm going to measure this block because I want to help with determining if our 1/4 of an inch seam allowance worked out. This unit here, if we're being perfect, should be 9 1/8 inch. Why that seems a little bit strange. Let's take a look. Right on the edge, look at that. It's 9 1/8 inch. And the beauty about that is we have sewn this at a standard 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 inch, because we can, right? Okay, cool, cool. So we proved our rule there. Okay, so now, how's our little guy go? Our little guy goes this way. Okay, so now we're gonna do one triangle unit to this side, one triangle unit to this side, then we're gonna press, and then we're gonna do the other ones. I like my units like this. Here's what's cool. I'm gonna be able to show you, which one was it? This was the one. Okay, this is not ideal. And here, I'm gonna show you why. I'm gonna do that first. I'm gonna do this one and this one. See, this one's going to go this way. And look, we can see right here. We can see where that point is, and this square is right there. But look what happens here because I pressed part of it. It's not as easy to see. So if this were pressed this way, it'd be easier to see like that. Just little tips and ways that we can help ourselves. Not a huge deal. So if we're going to do one corner to here and one corner to here, what's the easiest way for us to be able to find the center of this without a whole lot of hullabaloo and marking and pinning if we don't feel like it? Let's do that. We're going to do a little bit of crease right there. See it? And then, where are our pins? Where's my happy little pin cushion, friends? It's a little bit crazy around here today. I'm telling you what. Here we go. Okay, so now that's our little crease. let's go on this back part and see, I can still see that little point, but I'm going to put that my needle or my pin right in that little point right there. You can see a little bit better on this one. And I'm going to put that point right about a 1/4 inch in. Okay, and then I know this is centered right where it needs to be. Then I can pull the pin out and then I can pin it. It is probably advisable, because these pieces are on the bias, remember, we've cut on the diagonal, so there's a little bit of a stretch. Go ahead and give that a little bit of a pin right there. But remember, you're also going to have some of this hanging off, and we want that because remember, we want that for our extra seam allowance around the edge of our block. Okay, so there's that, and then we'll throw a pin here. And let's go ahead. Now let's go ahead and move back to our scant 1/4 inch as we're putting this all together, okay? And I'm going to get in just a couple of stitches before I pull that pin so I don't upset Jane. And I'm going to do my very best as I get to this middle part to go right on that point if I can. That's how I'm going to come as close as possible without cutting off my point. I don't want to go too far into my block because then I'm going to cut off my point on my little purple corner. And ideally we like our little points. It's the other thing that I like about my little design boards. I can use them for little pin cushions as I go along. Little temporary pin cushions. Okay, you are all happy. I am going to press my triangles out, my corners out, so my seam allowance is toward the corner, if that makes sense. Okay, I did fairly well there. My point is okay. And let's do this side same way. Let's go ahead and give us a little fold here. And then we can see right where that point is. I'm going to put this, yeah, it's so much easier to see it if I've got it on this fabric. Right there. I'm going to snug up my little corner piece right there. Pull that out. And then I'll pin it right into place. Over here. Wonderful. Seam allowance wants to flip. Go that way, little guy. There we go. Right on that point. Oh, the leaders and enders that I'm getting piled up. Ah, this is so great. That's a decent point as well. Let's point that out to the corner. Something's going on out there. It sounds like a semi. I don't know. Okay. Same. Oh, I forgot to make my little fold here. So I can see where my middle is. There is that guy right there. Everybody seems to be doing things outside now. I don't know what's going on, but like they're finishing up at the end of the year landscape projects and other things sometimes. Today, we are inside sharing our sewing together. Okay, there's that. one more corner. Give us a little crease there. Put our little pin right there in the center and right there, and then we line up. There we go. I can be using these pins, can't I? Okay, one more seam, and we are home free, friends. Okay, our last little ender for the day. Okay, let's see what we have. We want to go ahead and get our corner triangles pressed toward the triangle. We're going to have some trimming with this block, so stick with me. My iron is not hot, of course. It cooled while we were having our fun. That's okay, we can make it's pretty close. Okay, so now what we need to do is just a little bit of trimming to have our block be nice and ready to go. Where's our ruler? Here we go. Now remember, we can use that same way of making sure that line is lining up right across that diagonal, and then just going over to make sure we have a 1/4 of an inch on the side. And we're trimming off those little guys. We're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to line that up so that we've got a 1/4 of an inch hanging off the side there, so that we've got room to sew that block next to whatever, because we haven't decided that yet, but we're getting there, friends. We're getting more and more blocks together so that we're starting to go, who do we want where? What do we need? What do we need? What else do we need for block sizes? And I promise I've got us covered. I'm mapping it out. Look how cute. Isn't it great? Okay, look. I don't know, this could go, I feel like, oh geez, friends, we're gonna have to move these around for our top blocks. Maybe, I think you can still see this over there. Maybe we'll just stick this over here. I've got some little magnets that I use for my board. There it is. Everybody's happy. I'm happy. I hope you're happy. I hope you had a lovely day. I had a lovely day with you. And we will be ready for block 7 next week, Wednesday, here at A Scrappy Little Joy for the Weekly Whim. There will be other things going on, I'm sure, between now and then, but thank you for being here. I hope you had a good day. I did too.